Greetings, I'm DonTheCrown, and this is a guide to the Maven fight. You can reach the Maven by collecting 10 Crescent Splinters from top-end Maven's invitations, such as 10 boss region fights or special boss invitations. 10 of these splinters will form a Maven's Writ, which can be placed in your map device to open portals to the fight. Once inside, you'll find the Maven in the top right corner along with her brain? Yep, that's right. Another 2-ish boss at once fight will be facing off against the Maven and her brain. For this fight, you're going to want as much single target DPS as possible and probably at least 6,000 effective life. While you will regain some flash charges, having a way to regain even more through Pantheon or Flask on Crit is very helpful. There's also a lot of cold damage and chills, so I'd recommend being chill immune, but ailment immunity is very nice as well. Barring that, bringing some flasks of heat can be a big lifesaver. This fight has 2 alternating phases, followed by a final phase, with a memory game appearing several times to keep things spicy. In the first phase, the Maven will be directly attackable, while her brain will rotate around the room, peppering you with attacks. This phase will continue until you reduce the Maven's HP to 0, which can take a while. She'll teleport around the room somewhat frequently, so be careful to wait until she's moved to pop your flasks and other DPS cooldowns. The first phase has a lot of moves to keep track of, but don't worry, most of them will only pepper you with damage instead of killing you outright. The Maven herself has very few core moves. First, she has her Stand Still move, which she'll rise up into the air while shouting, and then begin closing giant laser scissors on you. Despite what she says, you probably shouldn't stand still. You can dodge out of the way by going to the sides or by moving a little bit towards one of the curtains and then changing lanes. This move does hurt, but is survivable. However, there's a lot of other damage going on during the fight that could push your HP to 0. If you have to get hit by this, try to move through it to limit the amount of time you're getting hit. Her next move is her Cold Gatling Gun move, and this is even more deadly than her Stand Still move, and is signaled by the words before she starts pelting you. She doesn't appear to use this if something's in melee range of her, but she can use it after any teleport, and this is the most deadly of all of her skills because of its sustained DPS. Do what you can to avoid getting hit by it repeatedly. Then she has a purple cage-like move where she'll summon a big purple cage, which is fairly easy to avoid. Lastly, there are these volatile orbs that spin around the arena. If they hit you, they will explode after a short delay and do a decent amount of damage. If too many of them stack up in the arena, the Maven will activate all of them and they'll chase you around. I'd recommend trying to keep the arena semi-clear so that these orbs don't end up hitting you while you're dealing with other mechanics. While you're dealing with all that, the Maven's brain is also going to be attacking you with a bunch of less deadly attacks, but that can still combo you into a death or potentially ruin the rest of the fight. The first move is definitely the most important of them all, which is the brain is going to fire out 3 slow-moving balls, which will pop, and then 3 smaller orbs will come out. There will be a sound effect when this happens, so pay attention for that. These orbs will lock on and chase after you, becoming progressively faster. Once they hit you, they'll leave behind a semi-permanent damage zone called a gravity well. Since there are 3 orbs, it's really important that once the first one connects with you, that you stop moving. Continuing to move will leave behind a string of zones, which will make navigating the arena much more difficult. Normally, you'd want to drop zones like this off on the side of the arena. However, due to the nature of the second and final phase of the fight, I'd recommend putting these zones directly in the middle of the room. While this does hinder your movement area a bit in the first phase, you're not going to be able to go there anyway in the other phases, so it's basically free real estate. These zones will get cleared up 2 times. However, the 3rd time you do this phase, the zones will be permanent, so be careful. The zones also do damage over time and apply a chill, so avoid stepping in them. The brain will also occasionally shoot out a large barrage of projectiles and slow-moving lightning balls. These both do a bit of damage, but they're more there to keep you on your toes and to lower your HP a bit than to kill you. That said, I wouldn't recommend sitting in the lightning balls as they do explode for a decent amount of damage, and the brain will also have a large charge-up attack that is announced with the voice line, "Death made real," which will then lay down a red telegraph that will shortly after have a beam blast through it. This isn't a guaranteed one-shot, but it'll hurt a ton, and I recommend avoiding it. Once you get the Maven down to 0%, the brain will move towards the middle and fill up the entire arena with a one-shot ability. During the charge up, the side walls will lower and you have to get out on these little ledges on the outside of the arena. The actual area is a bit smaller than you'd expect, so be careful. Once the AoE has exploded, the brain will channel a beam towards the middle of the two ledges and then begin to spin counterclockwise. This beam is extremely deadly because not only does it do decent damage, but it will also apply a nasty 10-second debuff that will reduce your max res by 10 and prevent you from recovering life and energy shield. So no leech, no regen for 10 seconds, while taking more damage than normal. Yeah, let's not touch the beam. And if you do need to pass through it though, dash skills like Flame Dash will go through cleanly, but Leap Slam will not. During this brain phase, you'll be attacking the brain itself, but it will also summon up some familiar bosses to fight you. It appears that any map boss is a valid summon at this point, which most of the time can be fine, but some are extremely deadly. Nothing like trying to DPS the boss while Brutus chain hooks you through the beam, or Corrupted Piety decides that she wants to spin around, or Rogue Exiles snare you so you can't move, or yeah, you get the point. Staying mobile and clearing both the mini-bosses in the brain is kind of important here, so AoE skills, chain, sniper's mark, or just a boatload of damage on the brain is key. If you do kill a mini-boss, the brain will just replace it shortly afterwards, so try to focus the brain as much as possible. Things like Decoy Totem can be useful here, but it dies pretty quickly. Once you remove 33% of the brain's HP, this phase will end and the mini-bosses will disappear, but if they left any lingering skills, such as a Chaos Tornado, these will persist for a little bit longer. After the first and second brain phases, you will return to the first phase and you'll get a guaranteed memory game. Because what boss fight would be complete without a minigame? The voice line is the cue that the memory game is about to begin. After a countdown, the Maven will light up an entire third of the floor with purple for a moment before lighting up another section. It's really important that you pay attention to the order here, because after she finishes her sequence, it'll be up to you to repeat it by moving around the room. While you're recreating the sequence, the Maven will start to expand a deadly circle from the middle of the room. As long as you quickly and correctly recreate the sequence, you should be fine. However, if you touch the growing circle, you will die. If you happen to land on an incorrect section, it'll flash red, and the circle will start to rapidly expand. You'll still have a few moments to complete the sequence, but if you're hardcore, you should log out right away, or you're gonna die. Once you complete the sequence, the Maven will cancel her death circle, and you go back into the first phase. Note that the length of the sequence seems to grow as the fight progresses, so I'd recommend finding ways to easily remember combinations of 3 sections. Also, if you start off on the first section, that's one section you don't need to memorize. Well, you always have a memory game once you return to the first phase. It's possible to have multiple memory games if the first phase goes on long enough. This makes managing gravity wells extremely important, because if you're going to be attempting to avoid them while also doing the memory game, you're likely going to die. Since the middle of the room is filled with an instant death mechanic, now you can see why I recommend dropping the gravity wells off there. Once you defeat the third brain phase, you'll enter the final phase. The brain will sink into the floor and start to fire off lasers all around the room. Each of these lasers will apply a recovery and res debuff from the previous phase, but it has a moving gap. It is really important that you mind the gap, and don't let the beams touch you. There's a short window where you'll be able to see where the beams will be before they activate, so move accordingly. This phase's difficulty is mostly dependent on how well you manage gravity wells in the first phase of the fight. The Maven will fight you just like she does in phase 1, but she has one more move, the big ball of fire. After saying, "Take this," the Maven will fire out a sizable fireball that explodes on impact and that does a seemingly low amount of damage, but with a decent sized ignite. Luckily, this will explode against minions, so it's not really that deadly. The primary concern in this phase is not getting nuked by her Frost Gatling gun skill while avoiding the lasers. If you've dropped most of the gravity wells in the middle of the room, you should have mostly clear space to move around. During this phase, the memory game will still happen, so make sure you're not getting hit by the beams as you watch the pattern and then recreate it. One small tip here is that if you do get hit by the beam while doing a memory game, you can delay the last move in the pattern to give you some time for your debuff to fall off. Once you reduce her HP to 0 for the 4th time of the fight, it'll be over. The beam should vanish and the loot will appear in the upper right corner of the room. As of this video, she always drops one of her uniques and has a chance to drop an elevated sextant and or a Maven's orb. And that's it for the Maven fight. Come on my Twitch stream sometime and have a great day.